The scent of my mother's apple pie, still warm in its carrier on the back seat, filled our car. It was the scent of my childhood, the official perfume of the annual Sterling family reunion. I was humming along to a song on the radio, tapping, my fingers on the steering wheel, filled with that familiar, happy anticipation. For 35 years, the last Saturday in July had been a sacred date. It was a day of loud laughter, of cousins running barefoot through sprinklers, of my father, Richard, standing proudly by the barbecue grill, the undisputed king of his beautiful country estate. To me, our family wasn't just close. It was a fortress of tradition and love, and my parents were its benevolent king and queen. Beside me, my husband, Mark, was quieter. He was staring out the passenger window as we turned onto the long, private gravel road that led to the house. "You okay?" I asked, nudging him gently. "You always get quiet when we get close." He gave me a small, tight smile. "Just mentally preparing for your Aunt Carol's interrogation about when we're going to have kids?" He joked, but there was a tension in his shoulders that his humor didn't quite dissolve. Mark had always been an outsider in my family. He was a quiet, observant man, a city boy from a small, modest family. My family, with their booming voices, their casual wealth, and their overlapping conversations, overwhelmed him. I always saw it as a simple case of social anxiety, a minor hurdle, in our otherwise perfect life. I never once thought it might be something else. I never once thought that his silence wasn't anxiety, but appraisal. We were driving past the old hayfields that bordered the property, the main house just visible on the crest of the hill. It was a perfect picture, a postcard from a life of success and stability. "Look," I said, pointing. "Looks like Uncle Robert finally got that new truck he was talking about." A shiny new truck was parked near the large, red barn that sat about halfway up the drive, far from the main house. But as I said it, I felt Mark's entire body go rigid beside me. His hand shot out and grabbed my forearm, his grip surprisingly tight. "Stop the car," he said, his voice a low, urgent whisper. I slowed down, confused. "What? Why?" "Just stop," he insisted. I pulled over to the side of the gravel road. Mark was no longer looking at me. His eyes were narrowed, focused on the scene by the barn a few hundred yards away. His face, which had been merely tense a moment ago, was now completely drained of color. He was as white as a sheet, his jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle throbbing. "Mark, you're scaring me. What is it?" I followed his gaze. I could see my father standing near the barn, talking to two men I didn't recognize. They were leaning against a sleek black sedan that looked ridiculously out of place in the rustic setting. It looked like my father was handing one of them a briefcase. "It's probably just some business associates of Dad's," I said, trying to sound casual, though Mark's fear was beginning to infect me. "No," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "No, Sarah, that's not a business associate's car." He was staring at the black sedan with an intensity that terrified me. He had seen something I couldn't see, recognized something I didn't understand. "Turn the car around," he said, his eyes still locked on the distant scene. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command, spoken with a desperate urgency that sent a chill down my spine. "What?" I was stunned. "Mark, we can't just turn around. It's the reunion. My whole family is waiting. Mom will be so disappointed." He finally tore his eyes away from the barn and looked at me. The pure, undiluted fear in his gaze struck me silent. "Sarah, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "Don't ask questions right now. Just trust me, please. Turn the car around. Now." I had been married to Mark for 5 years. I had never seen him like this, not once. He was the calm one, the steady one. Seeing him unravel, seeing this raw terror on his face, short-circuited all my arguments. My loyalty to my family, my excitement for the reunion, the pie sitting in the back seat, it all vanished, replaced by a sudden, primal need to do what he said. I trusted him, so I put the car in reverse, executed a clumsy three-point turn on the narrow gravel road, and drove away from my family home as fast as I could without drawing attention. The drive back to our apartment was the longest, most silent hour of my life. The air in the car was thick with unspoken questions. Mark just stared out the window, his face still pale, his hands clenched into tight fists in his lap. I didn't push him, I drove, but my mind was racing. What could he have possibly seen? A business deal? Why would that provoke such terror? I tried to rationalize it, to come up with an explanation that made sense, but nothing fit the look I had seen in his eyes. By the time we walked through the door of our apartment, my phone had started to explode. It was my mother, Helen. I ignored the first call. Then a text came through. Sarah, where are you? Is everything okay? Call me. Then my sister, then my Uncle Robert. The digital onslaught of my family's concern felt suffocating. I finally put the phone on silent and placed it face down on the counter. I turned to Mark, who was now pacing, back and forth in our small living room like a caged animal. Okay, I said, my voice firmer than I felt. We're home. We're safe. Now you have to tell me what that was about. You owe me that much. He stopped pacing and ran a trembling hand through his hair. I know I do. I'm sorry, Sarah. I needed to get us out of there first. He sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. I wasn't sure at first. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. But that car, I've seen it before. What car? It was just a black sedan, I said, my frustration rising. It wasn't just any black sedan, he said, looking up at me, his eyes dark with a memory I knew nothing about. That was Vincent Gallo's car. The name meant nothing to me. Who's Vincent Gallo? I asked. Mark took a deep, shuddering breath. He looked like a man about to confess a terrible secret. Before I met you, Sarah, he began, his voice low, I had a business partner. A guy who made some bad decisions, got involved with some bad people. He owed a lot of money to a man who was less of a banker and more of a predator, a loan shark. This man didn't break kneecaps with a baseball bat. He was smarter, more dangerous. He would ruin you financially, take your business, your house, everything. And he was known for being utterly ruthless if he felt he was being crossed or watched. His name was Vincent Gallo. A cold dread began to creep up my spine, but denial was a stronger force. Mark, that's a crazy story. But what does it have to do with my father? You saw him talking to some men. Maybe they just happened to drive the same model of car. No, Mark insisted, shaking his head. It wasn't just the car. It was one of the men standing next to it. His name is Frankie, the fixer, Coslow. He's Gallo's top enforcer. My old partner pointed him out to me once, told me to never ever make eye contact with that man. I saw him. Sarah, I saw him standing next to that car, and I saw your father hand him a briefcase. My world began to feel thin, unreal. No, I whispered. That's impossible. My father is a businessman, a respected man. He would never, ever be involved with criminals. You're mistaken. You have to be. I was defending my father, but I was also defending my own reality, the entire foundation of my life. My father was Richard Sterling, the man who taught me how to ride a bike, the man who gave a speech at my wedding that made everyone cry. He was not a man who dealt with mobsters in a dusty field. Sarah, Mark said, his voice pleading now. Think about it. The remoteness of the property. The fact that the meeting was happening at the far end of the estate, away from the main house, during a family reunion when dozens of people were present. It's a perfect cover. No one would ever suspect a thing. Suspect what? I cried, throwing my hands up in exasperation. That my father is some kind of secret criminal? It's absurd. I don't know what he is, Mark said, standing up and coming towards me. He took my hands in his. They were ice cold. But I know who Vincent Gallo is. And I know that good, honest men did not have meetings with his enforcer on a quiet Saturday afternoon. I don't know what's going on, but whatever it is, it's dangerous. When I saw them, all I could think was that they couldn't see us, that we had to get away before we were noticed. Because people like that, they don't like witnesses, Sarah. My phone buzzed again on the counter, a furious, insistent vibration. It was a text from my father. Your mother is in tears. I don't know what kind of game you are playing, but you have ruined her day. Call me immediately. The guilt hit me like a wave. My mother in tears, my father angry and disappointed. Maybe Mark was wrong. Maybe his past was coloring his present, making him see monsters where there were only men. Maybe I had just abandoned my family and broken my mother's heart based on a paranoid delusion. I pulled my hands away from Mark's. I need to call them, I said. I need to fix this. No, Sarah, don't, he pleaded. Just for tonight. Don't call them. Let's just think. Think about what? I shot back. Your crazy conspiracy theory? My father is not a mobster, Mark? He looked at me, his face filled with a deep sadness. I hope you're right, he said softly. I truly hope with all my heart that I am completely, utterly wrong. But what if I'm not? He walked over to his laptop, opened it, and started typing. What are you doing? I asked. I'm looking up public records, he said. Business filings, county property tax records. Let's see if the king's castle is really made of stone, or if it's just a house of cards. And that's how we spent our night. Not at a joyous family reunion, but huddled over a laptop in our silent apartment, digging into the financial life of the man I thought I knew better than anyone in the world. And with every click of the mouse, the foundation of my life began to crumble into dust. The hum of the laptop was the only sound in the room, a low thrumming, against the backdrop of my frantic, panicked heart. The aroma of my mother's apple pie, now cold and forgotten on the kitchen counter, seemed like a cruel joke, a scent from a life that I was beginning to fear had never really existed. I sat next to Mark, huddled over the glowing screen as if it were a campfire in a blizzard, though its light offered no warmth, only a growing, chilling dread. Where do we even start? I whispered, my voice betraying a tremor I couldn't control. We start with what's public, Mark said, his own voice low and steady. He was in his element now. The social anxiety was gone, replaced by a focused, analytical calm. It was the part of his mind I had fallen in love with, his ability to see patterns, to find order in chaos. I just never imagined he would one day turn that powerful lens onto my own family. Every business, every property leaves a digital footprint, he explained, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Liens, tax records, court filings, property deeds. It's all out there if you know where to look. He started with a family business, Sterling and Sons, the construction and development company my grandfather had started and my father had grown into a local institution. I had always pictured it as a mighty oak, solid and unshakable. The first click of the mouse sent a hairline crack through that image. That's odd, Mark murmured. There are 3 active liens on the company's main commercial property. Liens? What does that mean? I asked, a knot of ignorance tightening in my stomach. It means they owe people money and haven't paid, he said, his eyes scanning the screen. These are from suppliers. Large sums, and they were filed 6 months ago. My mind raced, trying to find an explanation. It must be a business dispute. Mark, Dad is tough but fair. He probably just disagreed with their invoicing. Mark didn't answer. He just kept clicking. Next, he pulled up county property records. My parents' estate was a sprawling patchwork of land acquired over decades. He always said this land was our legacy, I said softly, tracing the familiar property lines on the screen. He said it would stay in the Sterling family forever. Mark's face was grim. Well, he sold the north pasture 2 years ago, he said quietly, and the riverfront parcel last year. I stared at the screen in disbelief. The sales records were there in black and white. He had sold off nearly a third of the estate, the very land he had waxed poetic about at every holiday dinner. Why? Wouldn't he tell us? I whispered. Maybe. Maybe he was making a smart investment, I offered, my voice sounding weak even to my own ears. Maybe he reinvested the money somewhere better. Mark looked at me, his expression full of a pity I wasn't ready to accept. Or maybe he just needed the cash, Sarah. The anger came then, a hot defensive wave. It was easier to be angry at him than to accept the terrifying possibility that he was right. You don't know that. I snapped. You're looking for the worst case scenario because you've always been uncomfortable with my family's success. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Tearing them down. Mark looked away from the screen, his face etched with hurt. No, Sarah, he sighed, his voice heavy. This isn't what I want. The last thing I ever wanted was to be right about this. I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing it to understand what I saw at that barn. I'm doing it to protect you. His words deflated my anger, leaving a hollow ache in its place. I knew he was right. I watched in silence as he continued to dig. He found a series of small claims court filings against the business from the last 5 years. Lawsuits from painters, electricians, landscapers, all for unpaid bills. All of them had been settled out of court, their records sealed. My father, the pillar of the community, had a history of not paying the little guys. The mighty oak was beginning to look rotten from the inside out. For hours, we fell down a rabbit hole of debt and deception. Each document, each record, was another crack in the foundation of my life. The man I knew as my father, strong, proud, impeccably honest, was being replaced by a stranger, a man who was desperate, secretive, and drowning in financial trouble. But the final piece, the one that connected my father's secret financial ruin to the terrifying figure of a loan shark's enforcer, was still missing. The evidence was all circumstantial. Exhausted and emotionally frayed, I finally pushed back from the laptop. I can't look at any more of this, I said, my voice hoarse. It's all just numbers and legal documents. It doesn't prove anything. Sinister, it just proves Dad's business is struggling. I need to talk to them. I need to hear it from my mother. Mark looked wary. Sarah, I don't think that's a good idea. If they're in trouble, they won't admit it. They'll just lie. Then, I'll know they're lying, I insisted. I know my mother. I will know. I picked up my phone. My hands were trembling. I took a deep breath and tried to compose myself, pasting on a mental smile before I dialed. My mother answered on the second ring, her voice clipped and cold. Sarah. Mom, hi, I began, my voice overly cheerful and apologetic. I'm so sorry about today. Mark just came down with a terrible migraine out of nowhere. We had to turn back. I feel absolutely awful for ruining the party. I waited for the comforting. Oh, don't you worry, dear. These things happen. It never came. Instead, there was a brittle silence. Yes, she finally said. It was quite a scene. Your father was very displeased. I know, and I'm so sorry, I said, pressing on. Is everything okay, though? You sound a little stressed. Dad's been under a lot of pressure at work, hasn't he? The business seems to be going through a rough patch. It was a shot in the dark, a gentle probe based on the hours of research we had just done. The reaction was immediate and explosive. That is a ridiculous thing to say. She snapped, her voice suddenly sharp as ice. Your father is a brilliant businessman. You know nothing about his pressures or his business. Everything is perfectly fine. It is not your place to ask such foolish and disrespectful questions. Her defensiveness was a physical blow. She had never spoken to me like that before. The desperation in her voice was palpable. Everything is fine. The words of someone trying to convince themselves, not me. I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't mean to. I started to stammer. I have to go, Sarah, she said curtly. Your father and I am very tired. And then, just before the line went dead, I heard it. It was faint, muffled by the distance from her phone, but it was unmistakable. It was my father's voice, low and guttural with rage. Helen, who is that? Is it her? Did they see anything? Tell me what they saw. Click. The line went dead. I stood frozen in my living room, the phone still pressed to my ear, the silence. On the other end, roaring like a jet engine. Did they see anything? The 5 most terrifying words I had ever heard. The question wasn't, is Mark okay? It wasn't, I hope they're all right. It was the question of a man caught in the act. The question of a man who was not worried about his daughter's well-being, but about a witness to his crime. And that one heart-stopping moment, every piece of the puzzle clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The secret sale of the land. The liens from unpaid suppliers. My father's frantic, angry whisper. And the image of him in that dusty field, handing a briefcase to a man who worked for a violent loan shark. It wasn't a delusion. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was the truth. My perfect father, the king of his castle, was not what he seemed. He was a desperate man entangled in a dark, dangerous world I couldn't even begin to comprehend. The fortress of my family wasn't a fortress at all. It was a house of cards, and it was about to come crashing down. I lowered the phone, my hand, shaking uncontrollably. I looked at Mark, my own eyes wide with a terror that mirrored what I had seen in his hours earlier. The denial, the anger, the desperate need to believe in the fairy tale, it all washed away, leaving behind the cold, hard, terrifying truth. You were right, I whispered, the words barely making a sound. Oh my God, Mark, you were right. What have my parents done? The silence that filled our apartment after I hung up the phone was heavier and more profound than any silence I had ever known. It was the sound of a world breaking. The cherished, lifelong photograph of my family, the one I had carried in my mind since childhood, had been set on fire, and now all that remained was ash and smoke. I sank onto the couch, the strength leaving my legs. The whispered words, did they see anything? Echoed in my head, a demonic chorus. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about being caught. In that moment, the loving parents I had, adored my entire life, were replaced by 2 strangers frightened, deceitful strangers who had been wearing my parents' faces like masks. I began to sob. Not the quiet, dignified tears of grief, but wrenching, ugly sobs of a deeper, more complex loss. I was mourning the loss of my father, not to death, but to the truth. I was mourning the loss of my mother to a pride so fierce, it would rather risk danger than admit failure. I was mourning my own childhood, which now felt like an elaborate, beautifully constructed lie. Mark sat down beside me, wrapping his strong arms around me, and for the first time, I didn't pull away or try to be strong. I just collapsed against him, letting his steady presence be the only solid thing in my spinning universe. He didn't say, I told you so. He just held me, and in his silence, I found a small, safe harbor in the storm. What do we do? I whispered into his shoulder after the tears had subsided into exhausted shudders. What can we possibly do? I don't know, he admitted, his voice grave, but we have to do something. This isn't just about bad business deals anymore, Sarah. A man like Vincent Gallo, he doesn't just go away. Your parents aren't just in debt, they're in his cage. And if we're not careful, the door to that cage could swing open and pull us in too. Fear, cold and sharp, cut through my grief. He was right. This wasn't a family drama to be solved with heartfelt conversations or tearful apologies. This was a real, tangible threat. My parents, in their desperation, had invited a wolf into our lives, and now it was circling our home. We can't go. To the police, I said, my mind starting to work again, the analytical part of me kicking in. Dad's name would be ruined. And what if Gallo has contacts inside? It could make things worse. I agree, Mark said. And we can't confront your parents directly. They'll just lie. They'll deny everything and warn Gallo that we know. That puts us in even more danger. We were trapped. We held a truth that was as heavy and as dangerous as a live grenade. I know someone, Mark said after a long silence. A woman I met through a legal seminar years ago. Her name is Anya Albright. She's not a regular lawyer. Her specialty is extraction. She helps people untangle themselves from dangerous financial partnerships, criminal enterprises, and high-stakes corporate blackmail. She's discreet, brilliant, and utterly fearless. The next day, we were sitting in Ms. Albright's starkly modern, minimalist office. She was a woman in her 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through you. There was no art on her walls, no personal trinkets. Her office was a sterile, efficient machine, just like the woman herself. We told her everything, from the perfect family reunions to the terrified whisper on the phone. We laid out the financial documents Mark had found, the liens, the secret land sales. She listened intently, her face impassive, her fingers steepled under her chin. She didn't interrupt once. When we finished, she was silent for a long moment, her gaze distant. Vincent Gallo, she finally said, the name sounding like a piece of ice on her tongue. I'm familiar with his operations. Your husband is right to be terrified, Mrs. Sterling. Your father hasn't just borrowed money, he has sold his soul. And Mr. Gallo always comes to collect. She looked at me, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. Your parents have made a catastrophic mistake, born of pride and desperation. Our goal now is not to save them from their choices. It is to amputate you from this situation so that when their world collapses, and it will collapse, you are not caught in the blast radius. Amputate. The word was so clinical, so brutal, yet so perfectly right. For the next 2 weeks, we worked under Ms. Albright's precise, unwavering direction. We were no longer a confused couple. We were an operative team with a mission. She had us create a wall of legal and financial separation. We quietly liquidated a joint investment account I held with my parents. We had my name legally removed from the deed of a small summer cottage that had been in the family for generations. Every financial thread that connected me to Richard and Helen Sterling was systematically and silently snipped. Ms. Albright called it building a firewall. I called it breaking my own heart, one legal document at a time. The final step was the confrontation. Ms. Albright insisted it was necessary. They need to see that, she explained. It's a power play. We need to control the narrative and establish the terms of your exit. We cannot leave them with the belief that they still have any hold over you. The meeting was arranged. A formal letter from Ms. Albright's office summoned my parents to a meeting regarding an urgent and time-sensitive matter related to the Sterling Family Trust. They agreed, likely assuming it was a legal maneuver initiated by them to further consolidate their assets. They walked into the conference room with an air of arrogant defiance. My father looked tired but resolute. My mother's face was a mask of cold indignation. They saw me sitting beside Mark, and their expressions hardened. They thought this was going to be a tearful plea from their hysterical daughter. They were wrong. Ms. Albright began the meeting. "Thank you for coming, Mr. and Mrs. Sterling," she said, her voice crisp and devoid of warmth. "We are here today because my client, your daughter, has become aware of certain extracurricular financial partnerships the Sterling Company has entered into, specifically with an individual named Vincent Gallo." The blood drained from my father's face. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her pearls. I don't know what you're talking about," my father stammered. I looked at him then, at the man I had worshipped my entire life, and I spoke, my voice as calm and steady as Miss Albright's. "We know about the liens, Dad," I said. "We know about the land you sold without telling anyone. We know the business has been bankrupt on paper for years, and Mark saw you at the reunion. He saw you by the barn, handing a briefcase to Gallo's enforcer." My father crumpled. The proud patriarch, the king of the castle, simply deflated in his chair, a broken old man. He put his head in his hands and began to weep. My mother, however, reacted with a venomous fury. "You," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Mark. "This is your doing. You have always been jealous of this family. You have poisoned our daughter's mind against us." "Helen, stop," I said, my voice sharp, cutting her off. "Mark didn't do this. He saved me from this. He saw the fire you were both hiding, the fire you were fully prepared to let me walk into. This is not his fault. This is yours." Ms. Albright slid a final document across the table. "This is a legal agreement," she explained. "It states that Sarah will relinquish any and all future claims to the Sterling family estate and business. In return, you will sign over the deed to the small lake cottage, the one property that remains free of any liens. It is the only asset we can secure for her. You will sign it, and you will cease all contact with your daughter and her husband, effective immediately. If you refuse, or if any harm comes to them, the full documentation of your dealings with Mr. Gallo will be delivered to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Are we clear?" My father signed without even reading it, his hand shaking. My mother signed with a final hateful glare in my direction. And just like that, with the stroke of a pen, my family was gone. 6 months have passed. We sold the lake cottage. It was enough to give us a fresh start, a down payment on a small, simple house of our own, far away from the ghosts of my past. 2 months ago, the news broke. A massive federal raid had brought down Vincent Gallo's entire criminal empire. In the extensive press coverage, the name Richard Sterling was mentioned as one of the many businessmen whose assets had been seized. As part of the investigation, his house of cards had finally, spectacularly, collapsed. The grand estate was sold at a government auction for pennies on the dollar to pay off a fraction of what he owed. The last I heard, my parents were living in a small rental apartment, their reputation in ruins. I have not spoken to them. I sometimes feel a pang of sadness for the father I remember from my childhood, but I know that man has been gone for a very long time, replaced by a stranger consumed by pride and fear. My new reality is quieter, smaller, but it is real. It is honest. My family is no longer a large, loud gathering at a sprawling estate. It is me and Mark, sitting in our modest living room, a quiet understanding passing between us. My trust in him, a trust I almost abandoned in my blind loyalty to the past, was the single most important decision of my life. He didn't just save us from a dangerous situation. He saved me from a beautiful, suffocating lie. And I have learned that the most dangerous secrets are not the ones kept by our enemies, but the ones kept by the people we think we know the best.